And for more, we are joined by Dr. Lucy Tianxia, lecturer in the Politics and International Relations of China, the University of Oxford, as well as CNA's Olivia Xiong in Beijing. Well, first to you, Olivia, China rolling out the red carpet there. How are the Chinese characterizing this visit, and what signal is it trying to send to the world that's watching very closely?
Well, Telly, I would say that this is a big show of unity in this trip that is steeped in symbolism. Mr. Xi and Mr. Putin spending a lot of time together since the Russian leader arrived, having multiple meetings, also attending the opening ceremony to launch a year of culture, also meeting the press in which they issued this joint statement agreeing to deepen their partnership. And in the Chinese readout of the meetings, Mr. Xi is said to have described the China-Russia relationship as a fine example for major countries to treat each other with respect and pursue mutual benefit, perhaps a veiled swipe at the West as both continue to face pressure from the US-led West, especially with Russia's war in Ukraine. As we've seen the two countries draw closer to each other this year, also marking 75 years of diplomatic relations. I'll tell you.
Dr. Xia, growing China-Russia military relationship are clearly worrying the West. Are those concerns warranted?
Well, this is a question that is can be seen from two sides. So I think from the Chinese perspective, there has not been many confirmation, whereas, what kind of military arsenals or what kind of military support that China has supported Russia, because there's no confirmation from the Chinese side. And from the Western side, these are speculations. So I think these kind of military concerns can be seen from two sides, which is two sides of the same coin, if you will.
And Olivia, in terms of the economic ties between China and Russia, it has strengthened since the Ukraine war. What are the implications of this growing partnership for the global economy?
Well, as the US and the West have tried to isolate Russia, to put pressure on it, given its invasion of Ukraine, we have seen Moscow pivot to China. And we saw trade between the two countries hit historic highs last year, doubling from 5 years ago to reach $240 billion US dollars. That projected to go up to $300 billion by next year. And Mr. Putin, in a written interview with Chinese state media Xinhua ahead of the trip, said that this showed that there was a strong immunity to external challenges and crises. We also see that during the talks that have taken place today, that the two leaders discussed cooperation on the energy, economic, and trade front. We know that Mr. Putin is also said to, besides visiting Beijing, to head to Harbin in the northeastern Chinese province of Heilongjiang, which is seen as a gateway to expanding cooperation between China and Russia, given its proximity along the border. Also, a region with large amount of mineral and agricultural resources. And so we could see that trade between the two sides grow beyond the traditional sectors, particularly in the energy field, into agriculture, and China buying a lot more goods from Russia.
Right. And I also want to highlight it. It's been more than 2 years. Both leaders declared a no-limits partnership. But are there really no limits to this friendship? Well, Alexei Moraviv, Associate Professor of National Security and Strategic Studies at Curtin University, weighs in. Let's listen in.
That China doesn't throw itself in unconditionally back in Russia, for example, the way how North Korea does, is a demonstration of its limits. Clearly, Russia would have limits on how far it's prepared to support China beyond political and symbolic statements with regards to Taiwan dilemma or South China Sea dispute. So I think both countries understand that whilst they may be talking about no limits friendship, they haven't signed any mutually binding treaties.
So, Dr. Xia, it sounds like limitless friendship doesn't mean unconditional alliances. So, in your opinion, what do you think would be the biggest test to their relationship?
Well, this unlimitedness of Russia-China relations is quite catchy, but there's a lot of limits actually, because since the founding of the PRC in 1949, China has pursued a foreign policy that is not founded upon any alliances. So China does not pursue any alliance building. It only pursues partnership building, meaning that it's based on equal, kind of mutual respect for sovereignty as such. But in terms of the Russia-China relationship, this relationship is actually quite unbalanced because Russia only amounts to the 16th place in China's trade exports, whereas China has been providing Russia with a kind of an economic lifeline since the war in Ukraine. So this kind of relationship is really unbalanced, even on the trade agenda. And of course, China relies on Russia for energy export from the Siberia pipeline. So this is another thing that is a test for Russia-China relations. But of course, this year and next year, because of the 17th anniversary of Russia-China diplomatic ties celebrations, China has launched a cultural year of Russia for this year and the next. So I would say this is another aspect that is going to be mounted as an important aspect for China-Russia relations.
So, Olivia, is there also a sense that a tighter embrace of President Putin now could actually further alienate Europe, a key trading partner, as Beijing seeks to improve its image in the West?
I'll tell you, I think the timing here is quite key. We know that President Xi just returned from this closely watched trip to Europe, his first in 5 years, where he visited France and the Chinese-friendly Serbia and Hungary. And in France, he had those difficult conversations where the European Union put pressure on Mr. Xi regarding China's alleged support of Moscow and those accusations that China is supporting its wartime industry. The EU chief saying that China should use all its influence to try to rein in Moscow. And today, in the statements, we know that the Ukraine war was discussed. But really, if we were to look through at the language, there's not been a real change to China's position on the ongoing Ukraine war. It continues to call for a political settlement, saying it stands ready to play a constructive role, also putting the blame on the West, even without naming any country, saying that the Cold War mentality still exists and unilateralism, bloc confrontation threaten world peace and the security of all concerns. And this is even though we had seen Mr. Putin in that interview with Xinhua say that Russia would be open to dialogue about Ukraine, but he did emphasize that the interests of all countries, including Russia, should be taken into account. And so, Professor, that leads me to my next question to you. I'm keen to get your thoughts, because this rhetoric of, trying to get China to use its influence and close relationship with Russia, even with these new accusations and threats of possible sanctions by the U.S., we have seen Chinese entities already sanctioned because of their alleged involvement with Russia. But it seems nothing really has changed. So how do you see this moving forward? Is it possible that any of this pressure would help lead to a resolution, in your opinion?
I think we can see this as a short-term and long-term kind of perspective. So in the short term, when Macron and Xi met in Paris a few weeks ago, there were discussions about having a truce between during the Olympics Games in Paris this summer. So I would suspect that Xi and Putin might discuss this during their meetings. But in the long term, I think because, there has been sanctions against Russia, and also the US has just launched a new kind of string of tariff uplifting against Chinese companies and banks. In the long term, it seems like China will continue to present itself as a mediator role in this war against Ukraine from Russia. But it's not that simple as a question of whether or not China will actually put out a statement or not, because this is really something that will determine China's relationship with the West.
All right, plenty to discuss, but I'm afraid we have to leave things as is. We are running out of time, but thank you so very much, Dr. Lucy Qianxie, lecturer in the Politics and International Relations of China at the University of Oxford, as well as CNA's Olivia Xiong in Beijing.